Located in the Green Mountains near Bennington, the area has always had a reputation. It's an inaccessible region, remote and full of dark places, jutting outcroppings, vast marshlands, and quiet pools. It's easy to see how the topography might give birth to legends, if not actual monsters. That was Joseph Citro. My name's Kevin, and this is History Goon. What's going on, everybody? I am back again. This time, since it's October, I want to do something kind of spooky. Because, if you know me, this is kind of right in my wheelhouse. Not only is it Vermont-based, but it's also spooky-based. And I love spooky stuff. Be it ghost encounters, monster encounters, not so much UFOs, surprisingly enough. Not a big UFO guy. Not to say that I don't think that there's something else out there, because I do. I don't think that we're the only thing here. I think that mathematically, it's impossible that we are the only intelligent, somewhat intelligent species on a planet somewhere. But this also holds a special place in my heart personally, because I have a connection to these books that I got this information from. The two main sources that I used for this, we're talking about the Bennington Triangle, by the way. I probably should have started off by saying that. The two books that I got all the information from here, Passing Strange and Green Mountain Ghosts, Ghouls, and Unsolved Mysteries, I took both of these books out of the public library in town so many times that they fell apart. And I ended up having to actually buy copies of them myself once I was somewhat responsible adult with money. And I've had the pleasure to meet a couple of times Joseph Citro, the guy that wrote these books. He's another Vermonter. Very good author when it comes to paranormal and creepy stuff like this, but also fantastically talented fiction author. If you want one of the, honestly, in my opinion, so it can't be wrong because it's my opinion, one of the best like supernatural fiction books that I personally have ever read is called Shadow Child. It's so good. I cannot recommend it enough. Picking up a copy of this on Amazon, or if you have a Kindle, grabbing a copy of it there. Such a good book. Very, very good plot twist towards the end as well, that I actually had to set it down when I was done and went, no way. That's not how this book ends. And I went back and read the last chapter again and went, yeah, that's good. That's really good. Anyway, Joseph Citro coined the term Bennington Triangle in 1992 when researching for one of his many books, where he started noticing some similarities between the area and an area of Massachusetts known as the Bridgewater Triangle, which I can also do an episode on. I have plenty of stuff about that as well. Up here in the Green Mountains, our triangle's points are between the towns of Shaftesbury, Bennington, and Somerset. In that area lies the now unincorporated town of Glastonbury, and more importantly, Glastonbury Mountain. Glastonbury was first chartered in 1761, way back before Vermont was even its own state. At that point in time, we were still part of Massachusetts and New York, depending on where you were in the state. Where I am would have been closer to the New York half of it. But that's also a time where Massachusetts was literally Massachusetts, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine, and like half of Vermont. When Vermont held its first census in 1791, a total of 6 families lived in the town of Glastonbury. By 1800, all of those families had left and 8 different families had replaced them. By 1810, a total of 76 people called Glastonbury home, but by 1840, only 45 remained. After the Civil War, Glastonbury finally began to experience more rapid growth. Business interests in nearby Bennington were eager to take advantage of the vast timber resources there, and by 1872 had finally begun construction of a railroad trolley which ran up the mountain. The line ran along Bulls Brook Bowles Brooks, that sounds like a baseball player, Bowles Brook, and terminated at the place where the brook forked. It was an improbable achievement, with some parts of the line climbing as much as 250 feet in altitude per mile, which is pretty steep. I know that I have listeners in some states where like 250 feet above sea level is high. That's not us. We've I've driven through other states and gone, these are mountains? Like, huh, these are hills. Crazy. Remains of the old trolley tracks can still be seen today in some spots if you look hard enough for them. Meanwhile, the population had grown to 199 in 1870 and up to 241 in 1880. So this place is booming now. This includes only the permanent population. There was a bunch of other like transient workers that were drawn to the mountain to work in the logging business at that point. 2 additional sawmills were built in the 1870s, one at the original settlement called Fayetteville, and one at the new settlement on the railroad terminus, which became known as South Glastonbury. I tend to forget that there's so many people that listen to this show that aren't from here that are going to go, where the hell is he talking about? None of these places are real. They're not. They are, but they're not places you would have heard of if you're coming to Vermont. Generally, when people come to Vermont, they're like, I want to go to Killington, which is the ski resort town. Or I'm going to go to Burlington, which is where all the hippies are. And Ben and Jerry's. Well, they're in Waterbury, technically, the factory. But, and Burlington is great if you want to get stabbed after dark. Because it's very, Burlington is very inclusive and very welcoming. Unless it's Saturday night outside of a Nectar's. And then there's a pretty good chance that you're going to get stabbed or shot. Because Nectar's is it's closed now, dozens of wood kilns were built at South Glastonbury for converting the lumber into charcoal. At this time, Glastonbury was one of the 3 foremost sites in Vermont for producing the charcoal, which was feeding iron production in nearby Shaftesbury and then across the border into Troy, New York. By the late 1880s, however, the mountain had been cleared of nearly all of its mature trees, and the town's economy dipped dramatically. In 1889, the railroad shuts down, which, when the railroad shuts down in a small industrial town, the town dies. Every single time, basically. It was revived briefly in 1894 as an electric passenger trolley run by the Bennington and Woodford Railroad, and a brief and initially promising effort was made to convert South Glastonbury to a tourist attraction. A small fortune was spent to convert the area into a mountain resort area, which opened in the summer of 1898, but a freshet wiped out the railroad tracks that winter, marking the beginning of the end of Glastonbury as a functioning town. And you're probably wondering, what the hell's a freshet? So am I. ADD break. So the dictionary definition of a freshet is a rush of fresh water flowing into the sea, or more specifically in this case, a flood of a river from heavy rain or snowmelt, which, believe it or not, we get a bunch of snow here. Like pretty regularly, we get a bunch of snow here. Not as much now as we did when I was a kid, but things have happened. And of course, we had, like, growing up, we had snowmobiles, and we went through like 3 years, like 3 full winters where we barely had enough snow to run them. So my dad's like, we're going to get rid of them. Nobody's going to ride them anymore. We got rid of them. And then the following winter, we got like 48 inches of snow over the course of 2 weeks. Figures, right? Now, we're done with the socioeconomic part of it, which is good, because that was the super fun part. Now we're going to get into the boring stuff. The Algonquin people native to the area avoided this area, especially the mountain, because they felt the area was cursed ground because at the top of the mountain, the winds from all 4 directions would meet. The only reasoning that they had to go to the mountain was to bury their dead. Very Pet Cemetery.
Well, sometimes that is better.
But, why would you listen to people that have been here since right around 8500 BC? The same people that have reported mysterious lights, unidentifiable sounds, creatures that have no explanation, and smells that have no source. Why listen to them? They don't know what they're talking about. They're savages. After warnings from the natives, the settling families would meet with almost endless misfortune. Diseases made their way through the town. Others died during childbirth, which, I mean, it's the 1800s, so that's going to happen. And in 1892, a man named Henry McDowell went berserk and murdered Jim Crowley. The two men had gotten into some kind of an argument over something that's been lost to history, and McDowell hit Crowley in the head with a piece of wood or a big rock. Again, completely unknown. Forensics in the 1890s were pretty not good. Crowley didn't die immediately, but he lingered for a little bit. So while he was still alive, McDowell hung around the area. When Crowley died, McDowell took off, riding the rails into Canada, and came back to South Norwalk, Connecticut. He was tried for his crime and then sentenced to the Waterbury State Mental Hospital for Crowley's murder. We don't have a state hospital anymore. But if you go to, I believe the hospital is technically still there, it's just not operational like that. You can go up there and get all kinds of wild medical records. Matter of fact, my brother, who was a guest on the show at one point, wanted to do a little bit of research for the haunted house that we work at, which starts at as of time of recording, starts in 2 days, and I am pumped. Anyway, so the building was originally built as a preventorium for tuberculosis. Then if you go slightly through the woods from there, you have the building that's now the Vermont State Police Academy, where all of the Vermont State Police cadets and stuff go to train. That building was the sanatorium for adults with tuberculosis. So the preventorium, from what I gather, is basically if mom or dad had tuberculosis, the kids went here to make sure that they didn't catch it as well. Or if they had it, they were treated there also. Anyway, my brother went up there, up to the state hospital in Waterbury, got a bunch of records, including a DVD of a documentary that was made back in, like, I want to say the late 50s, early 60s, when it was converted over from the preventorium to a hospital for kids with special needs, not like kids with like physical disabilities, basically. So people like kids that would have had like MS or cerebral palsy or anything like that. And it's crazy because so we're sitting there watching the documentary, and as we're watching it, we're like, okay, so the room that they're in here is in the basement where the doctor's room is in the house itself. Or the room that this lady set up in is the holding chamber, which is a big living room. There's a couple of other buildings on the property, but there's also a cemented-in swimming pool, which is also really cool. But anyway, I think that was just a really long way to say that you can go up there and get medical records. Anyway, yeah. So Will McDowell was at the state hospital. He worked on the grounds, and after an undetermined time, McDowell hid in a bin and escaped and was never seen again. The area was already seen as mysterious and remote, the area of Glastonbury. John Harbour participated in the first hunting season ever in Vermont in October of 1897. Up until then, we just kind of shot stuff willy-nilly because you gots to eat. And there wasn't a lot of grocery stores with fresh meat in them in the pre-1900s. While he was out hunting, he was shot on October 1st, and no one ever came forward. His widow went to her grave decades later, never knowing who killed her husband. These stories would just add to the eerie vibes of the area. So now we know that the mountain has caused madness, tragedy, and a murder, but there are other things happening as well. The first and probably strangest of the paranormal anomalies is the man-eating stone. This is not made up. The natives told stories of a giant stone large enough for a man to stand on. When standing on this rock, it would feel like it was getting less solid and possibly starting to move. It would eventually open up and swallow whomever was standing on top of it. Could this be responsible for some of the disappearances in the area, like up in the mountain? Don't know. In my opinion, I don't think that the stones were eating people. When I think of a man-eating stone, I think more that dude from 127 Hours where the rock face ate his arm. But that was kind of his own fault. Like, yeah, you're getting out and doing something you love doing, but like, hey man, nobody ever lost their arm in a rock face by playing Metal Gear Solid all night. Just saying. I could definitely see this being a metaphor for a stone with a large split or a gap in it that you'd slip and fall into and never be seen again. Sure, great. The biggest and best known piece of paranormal strangeness in the Bennington Triangle is the Bennington Monster. Again, the natives had known of this creature for hundreds, if not thousands of years. This next little snippet I took directly from Joseph Citro's book, Green Mountain Ghost Ghouls and Unsolved Mysteries. Quote, one especially frightening tale comes from the 19th century when a stagecoach line passed along the ridge of Waterford and Glastonbury Mountains. Although the participants' names are long forgotten, their story is etched in the folk memory of the region. On one unforgettable nighttime run, the stage driver was forced to slow down when a sudden heavy rainfall ripped open the sky. That part I can confirm. The weather in this state is insane. It can change in the drop of a hat. My grandmother always had this thing where she would say like, "Oh, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, it'll change." She's usually not. She usually wasn't wrong about stuff like that. The quote continues, "The deluge was so fierce it washed out large sections of the road, eventually forcing the driver to a complete stop amid the dark wilderness. The horses bucked and whinnied almost in a panic. The driver feared a bobcat, grabbing his rifle and climbing down." We got tons of bobcats up here. And also, State Fish and Wildlife will tell you that we don't have mountain lions in the state of Vermont, but I can tell you I've seen 2 of them in the town that I live in. But, we don't have them. We also don't have wolves, which we have wolves. We also have our coyotes are like kind of like hybrid coyotes. So they are huge. Anyway, there in the pale light of his lantern, he saw huge circular imprints in the damp ground. Exploring with his lantern, he saw how the imprints formed a line of tracks as if somebody gigantic had just passed by. And he reasoned that this person must have just passed moments ago, or else the rain would have washed the imprints away. His heart quickened as he examined the tracks. Not only were they fresh, they were widely spaced and deep, meaning that this thing is big and heavy. The frightened driver concluded that if they were made by an animal, it must have been tremendous in size, very different from anything he had ever encountered. He called to the passengers. He wanted them to see the tracks and help him determine what manner of animal might be in their midst. You imagine?
Whose footprints are these?
That's 2 Metal Gear Solid references in here. Nice. And then wanting you to get out of your perfectly safe cart, like wagon, whatever, and like go traipsing around in the mud and look at monster tracks. I'm good. Actually, no. I'd have been like, yo, let's check this shit out. We're going to follow these, right? Just then, the horses reared and screamed. A savage, thunderous blow toppled the wooden carriage. 4 terrified passengers huddled with the driver, quaking in fear. As cold rain pelted them, they stared up at 2 large glowing eyes watching them from the nearby wood. A huge beast, partly obscured by trees, branches, and darkness, roared and trampled off into the night, leaving the travelers silent and stricken with horror. So, you can kind of take, do with that what you want. Do I personally think that there is possibly a large, like 7 to 12 foot tall bipedal ape in the United States walking through the woods? Yeah, I do. There is too many believable encounters with people that are trained observers, like police and military and firefighters and EMTs, people like that. And there's so many, every tribe in the country essentially has legends about something like this. So if a lot of these tribes that have never interacted, from anywhere from Vermont and Maine up over into Washington and Oregon, are all telling very similar stories about something, there's got to be something there. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe you're going to go, this guy's stupid, I'm not listening to any more of this show. And if that's the case, cool. But I think that there has to be something out there because, again, there's too many sightings. There's too many stories. There's too many legends for it to not be a thing. This area has long been a likely stomping ground for monsters due to the marshes and wetlands in the surrounding area. The area of Pine Valley reaches from Woodford to Manchester, and it is just chock full of wetlands, outcroppings, and small little ponds and moving water channels. Which, if you, depending on what camp you fall into, like Bigfoot or Sasquatch, I personally think physical creature. I don't think woo-woo, interdimensional, like it can just vanish. A lot of people that fall into the camp of physical creature say that the best way for these things to go unmolested through nature is to use waterways because they wouldn't leave footprints. It's essentially a road through the woods, and there's always a food source where there's water, be it fish or other wildlife, or, it's a water source. So that's always important too. But yeah, but that's not the only thing that's going on here. Not only have there been monster sightings and other paranormal events, there's also been a handful of unexplained disappearances in the area. And the best place to start with this is the first documented missing person in the Bennington Triangle named Mitty Rivers. Now, this next section, where I talk about the disappearances, this came from a book called Missing 411 Eastern States by David Paulides. I'm sure at this point in time, I think everybody's heard of the Missing 411 stuff. I will tell you, again, personally, if you're going to buy books, if you're going to buy any of these, because he has like Eastern States, Western States, Midwest. I think he's got like one that's just about college campuses. I know he's got a national parks one. If you want to buy any of these books, like if any of them sound interesting to you, do not buy them on Amazon. And I'm not saying that because I don't like Amazon. I use Amazon a lot. I use Amazon a lot for books. But if you go directly to his website, you're going to get it for like half the price you are on Amazon. Because I remember when I went to buy the Eastern States book, oh my God, probably 10 years ago at this point, it was like $55 on Amazon. And I was like, I'm not buying this. That's crazy. I'll try to find it at like a used bookstore or something like that. So I started just kind of poking around on the internet, as I do. And I found his website. I got the book for like $25 with free shipping. So take that how you want. Also, the money goes directly to him, and Amazon doesn't get a cut of it. So supporting little businesses and authors and stuff directly, pretty awesome. Speaking of which, I have a Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/historygoonpod if you want to support me directly. Anyway, Mitty Rivers, missing November 12th, 1945, Glastonbury Mountain, Bennington, Vermont. Immediate disappearance, 75 years old. Mitty Rivers lived almost his entire life in the Bennington area. He truly enjoyed the outdoor lifestyle and devoted every free minute of his time to hunting and fishing the area. Mitty was lucky to blend a hobby into his job, and he became a game guide. On November 12th, 1945, Mitty was taking 4 hunters into Glastonbury Mountain. They spent the day on the mountain and were on their way back down. Mitty had made this trip hundreds of times, be it out for work or out on his own time. He knew the mountain like you know your own backyard, and again, directly from the book. As the group was returning, Mitty got slightly ahead and somehow never arrived at the vehicles. A search was conducted, and the path that the group took was retraced. The only item that searchers found was one bullet next to a creek along the path that Mitty was traveling. The newspapers printed the following answer about the discovery of the bullet. Mitty leaned down to get a drink and it fell out of his pocket. Absolutely feasible. Anybody that's ever deer hunted in an area where it's cold, if you're wearing like a big heavy jacket, you're stuffing cartridges in whatever pocket you feel like, and you lose them. I have, over the years, I couldn't tell you how many rounds and how many different calibers I have lost in the woods just out walking. Not even hunting, just walking around out in the woods, because I'm not going to go out in the woods without a gun. It's just not the smartest thing in the world to do. I almost wonder if I want to tell that. We'll save that for the Patreon. I'll tell that story. Anyway, searchers never found Mitty, never even found his supplies, rifle, coat, hat, nothing. They found nothing. Case summary. Mitty was the one individual in the Bennington area who would never get lost. The idea that searchers couldn't locate his body meant that he was taken from the area. There is no other explanation. Finding the bullet next to the creek could have one other explanation. Mitty may have been walking near the creek, saw what appeared to be a threat, removed a bullet from his coat, and as he was trying to load his firearm, was overpowered. Think about what we just talked about in that last part with the wagon, and the large number of encounters that people have had in the woods up here in Vermont and all over the place. The thing to remember with encounters with stuff like that is, yes, there's places to report them. Back then, and even up until like modern times, people don't want to report stuff like that because, especially in a small town, which Vermont is nothing but small towns for the most part. If you're in a small town and you tell somebody about this, by the time you get home from telling that person about it, 20 other people in town know. And they all think you're crazy because you saw something that you saw in the woods. But because you said you saw something, they immediately like, he must have been drinking, he's crazy, blah, 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 blah. You know, it's small town stuff and it's fun. Perfect example of that. My dad wrecked his truck right after I got out of high school. So I didn't know about it from like the police calling or my mom calling. Somebody in town called me while I was at work and they're like, hey, heard your dad got into an accident. Is he okay? I'm like, what? I have no idea. What's that saying? Bad gas travels fast in a small town. Yeah. Now we're going to move on to the second reported missing person. And this one may have actually been you don't want to take anything away from anybody going missing, but Paula Jean Weldon may have been the most important missing person in the history of the state of Vermont. Missing December 1st, 1946, Glastonbury Mountain, Bennington, Vermont. Age at disappearance, 18 years old. The northeast of the main portion of Bennington and approximately an 8-mile drive up Highway 7, which is Route 7, which is the main north-south road that runs through the entire state. It runs from the Massachusetts border to like damn near Canada. Somerset Reservoir sits just to the east of the mountain. Glastonbury Mountain has an elevation of approximately 3,600 feet. On December 1st, 1946, Paula Weldon was a sophomore at Bennington College. She's got money. It's also where Peter Dinklage went to college, too. This was a Sunday, and Paula had worked the breakfast and lunch shifts at her dining hall. She went back to her dormitory room and told her roommate that she was going for a hike. Going for a hike in December is kind of a silly idea, but she was going up Glastonbury Mountain. She put on blue jeans, sneakers, and took her red parka with her. The red parka is going to become very important. A motorist who was passing by picked Paula up and dropped her off at Long Trail at the base of the mountain. Somewhere along the trail, Paula met fate and was never seen again. Her roommate reported her missing a day after Paula went to the mountain, hoping she would return, and she never did. Paula's father, W. Archibald Weldon, was an industrial engineer in Glastonbury, Connecticut, which is a much better off Glastonbury than the one in Vermont, and her mother Pamela took care of the household duties. Once news came of Paula's disappearance, her parents responded to the campus and stayed on site for almost 2 full weeks while the search was conducted. There were many false leads and rumors that ensued during the 14 days. In short, nothing was found and no leads were developed. The police did find the person who gave Paula a ride to the mountain, and he did confirm that he gave her a ride. Police also found a person who was hiking down the mountain that saw Paula at approximately 4 p.m. 4 p.m. in December here, it's damn near pitch dark at that point. The man stated that Paula asked him how long it was to the top of the mountain, and he stated that he was slightly concerned because it got to be dusk at 5 p.m., and then it started to snow, a total of 3 inches the first night that she was missing. Search teams scoured the mountain until weather started to deteriorate. After 2 weeks, all SAR operations, which are search and rescue operations, were terminated for 1946. On May 26, 1947, there was an article in the Meridian Daily Journal. The article explained that another 2-day search for Paula was conducted over 24 square miles. The following statement appeared in the article, quote, among spots investigated by searchers were Bickford Hollow area where, quote, a strong odor at first believed to be that of an animal or human body was detected Saturday, and the swamp section in Manchester where screams of a young girl were reported on the night that Paula disappeared. Again, if we want to go the Sasquatch Bigfoot route, strong smells are almost always associated with sightings of that particular critter. Law enforcement did have reports of a woman screaming in the swampy area, and they were now searching again. The 2 days of search efforts did not produce any other positive results. Hundreds of people participated in the search for Paula Weldon. The search was touted as one of the largest ever conducted in the state. Case summary. At the time of Paula's disappearance, there was not a state police department in Vermont, and this lack of coordinated effort may have hindered the investigation. Again, this is directly from the book. I do believe that Paula was murdered and or abducted, or she would have turned up somewhere by now. There was never an inkling that Paula was anything but a good student and a caring daughter. A December 17th, 1961 article in the Sunday Herald had an interview with the Vermont State Police, which was now an established law enforcement organization still working the Weldon case. The article stated that the Vermont investigators had come to some definitive conclusions about the Paula Weldon case. Quote, Paula was either dead somewhere in the white vastness of Glastonbury Mountain, or she had been carried away and killed. The last part of the previous statement has me a bit perplexed. Carried away and killed by what? A normal-sized man would have an extraordinarily difficult time carrying someone down the mountain, let alone carrying her without being seen. That's a very good point. I mean, like a normal-sized guy could probably carry a 5'2", 5'3", 120-pound girl down the mountain, like with some ease. Without being seen, on the other hand, is the tricky part. One portion of this investigation has me very concerned. Many people who have disappeared and were subsequently found were found in swampy areas. Law enforcement did state that a witness heard a female scream in the swamps in the swampy area of Bickford Hollow the night Paula disappeared. Bickford Hollow is a location off Long Trail Road and probably 1,000 feet from the end and to the north. The hollow is at the end of a long ridgeline that has a start near Glastonbury Mountain. The elevation at the hollow is 1,500 feet. If we follow the evidence in many missing persons cases listed in this book, there is a reasonably good likelihood that Paula Weldon is located in the swamp. The last issue of concern is what Paula was wearing, a red coat. It would seem the brighter the color of the clothing, the better the chance that searchers would find a missing person, which is almost the opposite in this case. It may be that the bright color attracted predators, but it also seems that many people who have disappeared have been wearing red. Mitty Rivers also wearing a red coat when he went missing. A red and white checkered coat, which, just for shits and kicks, let's find out when that company started. Let's see, it was most likely probably a Johnson Woolens jacket. I only know that because they are they're all made in Vermont, and they were found in 1842, according to my very brief ADD break that I just took. And I can tell you from personal experience, they are very, very warm jackets. They're expensive, but well worth the money. Our next disappeared person is Paul Jepson. Missing October 12th, 1950, city dump, Bennington, Vermont. Age at disappearance, 8 years old. This is sad. I mean, not that the rest of them weren't sad, but an 8-year-old going missing is kind of, hits a little bit closer to home than a 75-year-old man, Nancy and Paul Jepson were school teachers in Schenectady, New York, when they decided they wanted a rural life for their family. Paul got a job as the local tax collector in Shaftesbury. He's the one that should have gone missing, let's be real. And the family bought a ranch in that city. The Jepsons had 2 children, Nancy, 7 years old, and Paul Jr., 8 years old. They're busy, Irish twins. The Jepson family was an energetic group who had several financial interests. While Paul took care of the family farm and the tax collections, Nancy was responsible for the 65 pigs that they left at the Bennington dump, which is weird. I don't know why you would leave your pigs at the dump. Every day, Nancy would go to the dump and relocate the pigs to a different plot on the site. The dump was located at the base of the Bald Mountains. On October 12, 1950, Nancy took the family truck with Paul Jr. in the front seat and drove to the dump as she usually did every day at around 3 p.m. She parked the truck near the forest and adjacent to a ravine and started the 30-minute process of moving the pigs. At the end of the move, Nancy came back to the truck and found that Paul was missing. And again, this is 1950. This is before you could just stick your kid in the vehicle with a Game Boy or, for everybody that's younger than me, a Nintendo Switch. And just be like, hey, do this, I guess. This kid's just like twiddling his thumbs and looking at an atlas or something, whatever the hell they had in vehicles in the 50s. Probably not changing the radio stations because that would most likely result in an ass weapon. She ran to the woods calling Paul's name and then ran towards the ravine and looked into the gully. She did not see the boy. She now went to the dump office and called her husband, who then called the sheriff. Inside of 2 hours, deputies and wardens had responded to the dump and were starting a search. Paul Jepson felt his son might have gone into the woods because he had a fascination with the forest. There was also concern that maybe there was a slight landslide in the dump and the boy was possibly buried. The possibility was checked and confirmed that it did not occur. The sheriff brought in a canine and attempted to track the boy's scent. The dog appeared to follow a scent down the road onto another road and then seemingly stopped. All of the homes along those roads were contacted and nobody had seen the boy. On October 16, 1950, the North Adams Transcript ran the following paragraphs. Quote, Sheriff Maloney said today that he has discarded for the time being any theory that the boy might have met with foul play. As the search continued, a Coast Guard helicopter was brought in to search the mountains for Paul. They did not have any luck in finding him. Professional and volunteer searchers looked for Paul Jepson Jr. for almost 2 weeks, but they found nothing. Case summary. The disappearance of Paul Jepson occurred 16 days before the disappearance of Frida Langer. Langer and Jepson disappeared within miles of each other. Paul Jr. disappeared at the base of the Bald Mountains. An investigator could not ignore the geographical similarities and timelines between these cases. A very important similarity between the Baker, Weldon, Jepson, and Langer cases is that they disappeared in the woods. I'm sorry, Alice Baker is another person that went missing, but they actually found her on an old logging road in that same area. These people did not disappear on a city sidewalk. Paul Jepson believed his son wandered into the woods. This is where I would have focused my energies. Having knowledge of many missing children in the far northern portion of the U.S., my gut would tell me that Paul ended up high on Bald Mountain somewhere, somehow. I believe it was in his National Parks book that he talked about a story at, can't remember if it was Yosemite or Yellowstone. A little boy went missing, and he was, I think he was like 4 or 5 years old, very, very young. Went missing. They never found him, but they found his clothes, like folded very neatly with his shoes on top of it, with his socks balled up in the shoes, full of foot bones. But they never found the boy, which is weird as shit. But again, a lot of weird stuff happens in national parks. So let's move forward to Frida Langer. Missing, October 28th, 1950, Somerset, Vermont. Age at disappearance, 53 years old. Mr. and Mrs. Langer left their residence in North Adams and proceeded to their hunting cabin in Somerset, Vermont, just 4 miles east of Bennington. Max and Frida brought their cousin Herbert Elsner with them to hunt. The group arrived at the cabin in the woods and unpacked their supplies. They were in an area that was quite well known to the Langers. They had owned and vacationed at this cabin for 14 years. On October 28, 1950, Max woke up with a very sore knee and told Frida and Herbert to go out and hunt and he'd stay behind at the camp. Frida and Herbert got out of the camp late and were walking for almost an hour when Frida tripped and fell into a small creek, getting wet. She told Herbert that she was getting cold and wanted to go back to the camp and change clothes. The two walked in the direction of camp for several minutes and then decided to momentarily split up, but later meet back in camp. It was now 3:50 p.m. An article in the Lowell Sun dated October 31st, 1950 stated, quote, when last seen, Frida Langer was drenched from a fall into a brook. It was within 150 yards of the woodland cabin that her and her husband had owned for 14 years. She's a football field and a half away from her cabin. She's very, very close. At 4:45, Herbert arrived back at camp and Frida had still not arrived. It was at this point that Max and Herbert decided to go out and search for Frida. The men were concerned because Frida knew the area very well. There was no way in their minds that she could have been lost, not this close to the cabin. The men did not find Frida the first night and obtained assistance from wardens and law enforcement the next day. A week-long search for Frida could not find the lady, and efforts were eventually suspended. Nothing further was developed on the search for Frida until May 14, 1951. James Renton and Herbert Lincoln were fishing at a spot 3 miles from the hunting cabin that Frida and Max were staying at. This is an area that had already been thoroughly searched when Frida initially disappeared. The men saw something in high weeds at the end of the swamp near a flood dam. The men walked into the reeds and swamp and saw a body, the body of Frida Langer. A coroner's report had indicated that Frida died of accidental drowning. That's odd, right? Case summary. In reading the article associated with the Frida Langer case, I was shocked that there was not an inquiry into her death. The woman was 150 yards from a cabin that she had owned for 14 years. There's no way she was lost. The woman knew exactly where she was going. Something very bad happened to her. The key to this and many other cases highlighted in this book is the location of the body. Frida was found in a swampy area in high weeds, a description very similar to many other locations where bodies in this book have been found. You cannot convince me that people seek out swamps to walk into and die. Frida knew this area as well as Corey Kelly knew northern Minnesota. See chapter on Minnesota, which I'm not sure how we put Minnesota in the eastern states. Kelly was found in an almost identical area as Frida. If a predator wanted to take a person into an area where they wouldn't be seen and a person wouldn't walk up on them, a swamp with high reeds would be ideal. Time span of 24 years represented all of the missing people in Vermont that met the criteria for this book. From 1926 to 1950, 7 people disappeared in Vermont. Something highly unusual was happening in southwest Vermont during those years, and it then appeared to have moved on to Pennsylvania. Yes, there was significant activity in Pennsylvania before 1950, but from 1950 to 1957, there were 5 disappearances. There was a similar pattern of disappearances in New Jersey and New England. The disappearance of Paul Jepson Jr. and Frida Langer 16 days apart cannot be ignored. Jepson, an 8-year-old male, and Langer, a 53-year-old female, both disappeared in very rural settings, and neither was ever found. Common sense dictates much about how an investigation is conducted. These dates are too close together and in too geographically close proximity to each other to think they are not somehow related. Now, there's a couple that happened in the same area that happened previous to some of these that are not necessarily chalked up to the Bennington Triangle, but they all happened in the same area. They just didn't make it into the book. Maybe there's not enough evidence. I don't know. These 2 are really, really weird, though. This may be one of the strangest of all of them, and this is one of the ones we know the least about. James Tedford was a World War II veteran who lived in Fletcher with his wife, Pearl. When he was called away to serve, everything was normal. Things got strange when he returned from service and found no Pearl at home. Neighbors had reportedly seen her walking to town to go to the grocery store that morning, but she was never seen at the store or ever again for that matter. Just a few years after Pearl disappeared and 3 years after Paula Weldon vanished, James went to St. Albans by bus to visit some friends. St. Albans is clear the hell on the other half of the state to the north. St. Albans is like damn near Canada, where Bennington is damn near Massachusetts. As the bus approached the area of Bennington, 14 other passengers all noticed that James was missing. He had been on the bus the entire trip, not having gotten off at either stop that they'd made along the 3-hour drive. As a matter of fact, all of his belongings were still in the seat next to where he had been sitting the entire trip. So either he vanished into thin air without a trace, or every single person on that bus is lying. This last one might be my favorite, and it's one of the earliest recorded disappearances in the Triangle. So something to keep in mind with this case is this involves someone very, very much like Mitty Rivers, who is a very experienced outdoorsman, very experienced hunter. This guy could find his way home in a snowstorm like nothing through the woods. In 1943, Carl Herrick was enjoying a hunting trip with his cousin Henry, 10 miles northeast of Glastonbury town. The two became separated and Carl never returned. Henry found Carl's body 3 days later in a bizarre scene. Carl's ribs had punctured his lungs, and the postmortem indicated that something had squeezed him to death. Henry reported that there was large, strange bear prints around the corpse. However, experts say a bear would not be able to squeeze a human to death. The other thing he found was Carl's rifle, with the barrel bent almost in half. And if you're not familiar with a hunting rifle, or rifles in general for that matter, you can't just grab a barrel and bend it. It doesn't work like that. They're very, very, very hard steel. It would take a lot of force to bend a rifle barrel. So that was the Bennington Triangle. Not even all of it, just a little bit. Just a little bit. I wanted to get into the disappearances. I wanted to talk about a little bit of the monsters and weird stuff, because I like monsters and weird stuff. But I also had to record something spooky for October. I mean, this is kind of spooky. Now, if you want something different for October, if you're over on the Patreon, patreon.com/1159media, you would have seen that I made an announcement that you guys on Patreon are going to get something special that I'm currently working on, and I hope you like it. But again, if you go to Patreon, $5 a month gets you early access to my show, gets you early access and backdoor access to pretty much everything else over there too. We got a neat little group of people between the shows and our family that is there all the time for like backdoor access to 911 calls and Never Daily. The group of eclectic weirdos that we love because you guys are great. And it's not just because you give us money, because I know that there's some of you that, you know, you would still be cool even if you weren't on Patreon, right? Like a couple of you probably, I would think. But anyway, next episode is going to be big. I hope you enjoyed this one. And until then, we're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world, just like the Bennington Triangle. Thanks.